10-year-old Giulia pulled from the rubble. Her parents survived, her little sister did not. At least 250 dead and a whole string of towns in central Italy that may never be rebuilt. There is nothing more terrifying than a powerful aftershock in a town teetering on total collapse, full of rescuers still looking for survivors. Good evening. The death toll in Italy climbed to at least 250 today, and authorities now believe that there may be no more survivors. Hundreds are injured, thousands are homeless, and because of their location on an active tectonic fault line, it is possible that the devastated towns and villages in the Apennines of central Italy will never be rebuilt. We are live again in Umbria tonight.
Also tonight, you've heard of a winter crisis in the NHS, but why is there now a summer one? One hospital closes its doors to children's emergency cases as health chiefs warn politicians need to have a more honest debate with the public about what the health service can and cannot afford. The mystery continues of how 5 friends in their late teens and early 20s drowned yesterday at Camber Sands. And today's GCSE results showed a fall in grades A star to C. So has making people resit English and maths if they get a D or lower been a good idea or not?
He played Walter's son in the cult series Breaking Bad, and like his character, RJ Mitty has cerebral palsy.
Does that put him to sleep?
This one just relaxes him a little.
In a few weeks' time, he'll be part of Channel 4's presenting team for the Paralympics in Rio. He'll be here live and we'll ask him about the Games and what they meant to him. The death toll from the devastating pre-dawn earthquake in central Italy continues to rise. Rescue teams using sniffer dogs, bulldozers and their bare hands worked through the night in a desperate search for survivors. At least 368 more people were injured and an unknown number remained trapped in the collapsed buildings in the ancient hilltop towns and villages of Amatrice, Accumuli, Aquata del Tronto and Pescara del Tronto in central Italy. There have been hundreds of aftershocks since the quake struck, hampering relief efforts and damaging already very unstable buildings. Well, Kieran Jenkins is live for us there now. Kieran.
Well, we are high here, very high in the Apennine Mountains, in a town, Pescara del Tronto, where the devastation was near total. To walk down the street here is basically to see this, mound after mound of rubble where houses used to be, or to see houses with the sides entirely ripped off them. Now, there are thousands of rescuers in this vast, vast region where the earthquake hit. We are in Pescara del Tronto. That's about 2 hours from Amatrice, the other town that was almost completely devastated. We're about 3 hours from Rome. Now, to get help here, to get the heavy machinery they needed here, they had to lug it up miles and miles of narrow, winding roads. Not easy at all. And now that they are here, in this place, there's almost nobody left to save. We spoke to one man who himself escaped from a falling building, went out to try and rescue others. He alone came across 9 bodies. They tell us that the population here is around 100 people. Unofficially, they reckon almost half of them are dead. Pescara del Tronto, the town that was wiped away. This place was paradise, one man told us today. They talk like it's no longer here. There are echoes of people everywhere. Homes left in a hurry, or not left at all. Through this deserted place walks a man, a bishop, we learn, deep in thought. As you were walking through the streets here, you were praying. Yes, I was praying, he said. I called on the Lord to help us. Then we see a young man alone. He's Francesco, 17 years old.
I watched all with my eyes. I watched my friends, my best friends, die. And it's a critical situation.
What happened? Were you with them?
Panic and cry. scared. I'm scared.
Francesco is back for his belongings. Wearing a bike helmet, he's squeezed into a building in danger of collapse. He was staying with friends. 5 of them died, the youngest 13. They did find a 10-year-old girl alive here, Giulia. But that was yesterday.
Si spera sempre comunque.
Lorenzo, a rescuer, says, I always hope to find people alive, but in reality, we find bodies and we feel powerless. Well, this is Via Solaria. This would have been one of the grander properties here. A beautiful entrance to someone's beautiful home. And now it's all that's left of this building. Everything else has fallen away, and you wonder how anyone survived. Those who do make it out are housed in camps on lower ground. But this one's not ready yet. And so alongside it, a group of teenagers have made their own. Some have lost their homes. Andrea is mourning the loss of his grandmother.
Penso che c'è bisogno di rispondere.
It's indescribable, he said. Yesterday I spent the whole day searching for her in Amatrice. What happened there, I wouldn't wish on anybody. It was in Amatrice that most lives were lost. Buildings that haven't fallen threaten to. At 3 p.m. today, an aftershock. They're in danger, but the rescuers go on. A shout for silence. There's a whistle, and then a wait for signs of life. Well, thousands of people will spend tonight in camps. They're being rapidly put up right around this region. They do, though, have a worrying look of permanence about them. People here often talk about the 2009 quake in this region, in L'Aquila. There, people lived in tents for many months after the earthquake. There's something positive to draw from that as well. People were still being pulled alive from the rubble there 72 hours after the earthquake. So there is still time, and that gives the search purpose, particularly in Amatrice, which is about, as I say, 2 hours away. It's not been helped, though, by the hundreds of aftershocks we were experiencing here. There was one earlier that was 4.3 magnitude. And whenever we get one like that, the rescuers have to flee from the buildings, which are at risk of collapse. Here, though, by contrast, there is almost a resignation. The place is terrifyingly quiet. One of the rescue coordinators told us a little earlier that this place is history. It only lives now in our memories and in our hearts.
Kieran Jenkins in Central Italy, thank you very much indeed. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to Christian Giosso from the Italian Red Cross team in Amatrice, and I asked him what major challenges he faced.
So first of all, I would like to recall the fact that the earthquake affected a really vast zone of central Italy, which is particularly composed by mountains and walls. So we are really struggling in getting able to reach all the affected and minor villages and small towns in the region. This is the most challenging issue we are facing right now, because if compared with other previous earthquakes, we really are now affording a different situation. Let's say about L'Aquila, it was only one big town affected and some minor villages in the near. Now we are really reach small towns which are, let's say, 50 kilometers far from the earthquake center.
Do you think that you might still find some survivors, or have you given up on finding any?
Now we are approaching the 48 hours from the earthquake event, and of course much more the time runs, and lower are the chances to find someone live. However, this morning we just saved another small child, 10 years old, and it has been really nice to see how the human life could be strong in affording such situations. So we are always trying and hoping to save much more people as possible.
What about the thousands of homeless people?
The Italian Red Cross, together along with the civil defense, organized since the very beginning a camp composed by hundreds of tents where we could accommodate right now up to 1,000 people split in 4 different camps, 3 located in Amatrice and 1 more located in Accumoli, which is another very hit village, let's say 50 kilometers north from Amatrice. So 1,000 people could have recover for night, shelters, also clothes for dressing and whatever they need, food of course. And in this particular situation we do not face any particular challenge.
There have been dozens of aftershocks, and one in particular was very powerful. That must have been terrifying.
It has been, and let's say since yesterday early morning, we were able to fill approximately, let's say, 500 more chauffeurs here, some of which has been very strong, reaching the 4.2 magnitude also this afternoon. So collapses continue, and some more parts of the cities is still collapsing after every kind of chauffeur.
And when there is an aftershock, it makes any sort of rescue work particularly dangerous and difficult, doesn't it?
It is actually, of course. Firefighters are doing their best to do that. They are handling the situations perfectly. However, of course, safe is of every time the first target. So a safe rescue would also grant a better rescue for everybody. So that's our target in each kind of situations we are approaching. The firefighters has the much complicated part on this, but they are very well trained to do that, and I can say that they are doing just an exceptional job on this way.
Okay, got to leave it there. Christian Josso, thank you very much indeed, and good luck.
Stafford's County Hospital has suspended accident and emergency services for children because of a lack of professionally trained and experienced staff. The announcement came as health chiefs warned that there is a growing gap between what the NHS can afford and what it's being asked to do. Our health and social care correspondent, Victoria MacDonald, has spent the day at Grantham District Hospital in Lincolnshire, which has announced that it's to close its doors at night because of a shortage of emergency doctors.
It is, the bosses here say, only a temporary measure, closing the A&E department overnight because there aren't enough doctors to staff the Lincolnshire Trust's other 2 emergency units.
The decision to close the A&E here overnight has, of course, caused controversy, at least locally. There are even threats of legal action. But the Trust says it's the only way that it can guarantee providing a safe service across all its hospitals. More than that, though, this is a sign of a deeper problem across the health service. And now there are calls for a proper debate with the public about what has to give to keep the NHS on track.
And the release of spending figures today, along with performance levels, highlight the tensions. NHS hospitals in England had a deficit of £461 million in the first 3 months of the financial year. That is a big improvement on last year, but it includes a £450 million one-off grant, somewhat taking the shine off. And even before these numbers were released today, another trust announced it was closing its A&E to children. County Hospital in Stafford said it was on safety grounds. And Chorley Hospital in Lancashire has also closed its emergency unit. Grantham A&E was closed to keep open the Trust's other emergency departments, including this one at Lincoln, where the situation came close to being dangerous.
3 or 4 weeks ago at 7:30 in the morning, we were informed that there were 25 patients in the accident and emergency department, I think 1 or 2 in resuscitation, but the day team that were due to come on, the middle grade, had rung in sick, and the locum consultant that was meant to start had indicated that he wasn't coming in. So we were then faced with a department full of people where the night shift were going home and we had nobody then to start the day shift.
These closures are about staffing, the difficulty of recruiting doctors, but performance figures today show just how severe the pressure is across the NHS. 3.45 million patients now on the waiting list for elective care, including operations. 300,000 more patients in A&E than at the same time last year, and a nearly 61% increase in trolley waits. Now, the Health Secretary and the head of NHS England have been challenged to acknowledge the problem and start that debate.
Every NHS member of staff will do their absolute best to ensure that care quality is maintained and that services are of a right quality. But what our members are now saying is they cannot carry on with that with the level of funding available, and we need an honest, realistic, open debate about what the NHS does to cope with the much lower levels of funding increase we're going to see next year and the year after.
Smaller trusts are now being asked to see if there are marginal services that they can close or move to larger hospitals. But with NHS funding due to fall sharply over the next 2 years, few think that will be little more than a sticking plaster.
Victoria MacDonald. Well, we did ask to speak to a minister from the Department of Health or anyone from NHS England, but no one was available. Joining me now is Labour Shadow Health Secretary Diane Abbott and Mark Diane from the Nuffield Trust.
Good evening.
Mark Diane, why do you think politicians need to be more honest with the public about what the NHS can and can't do?
Well, I think if you look at what we're seeing at the moment, it's clear that the service is already under tremendous financial strain. And what our research has done is to look forward and see what sort of savings the NHS will have to make, what it'll have to do to keep going with the budget envelope that's set down to it. And what we see is that there'll have to be, within the money that's currently being granted, incredibly ambitious savings, both inside hospitals being more efficient and stopping the rising number of patients coming forward from happening quite so quickly. And both those are really unknown territory. They're things that may not even be possible at the rate they're required.
So this applies to all politicians, and not just the government?
I think, you know, that the more that this is discussed, the more that the public start to think through what some of the options are, the better, really.
Diane Abbott, I mean, do you think you are being straight with people when you make promises about the NHS and renationalising and what you can deliver?
I've only been Shadow Secretary of State for Health for a month or so. I think it's right that we need an honest and open debate with the public, and we do have to begin by accepting the NHS is underfunded. And we also have to recognise that some very short-sighted cuts in local government, particularly the money available to local government to spend on social care, has put a lot more pressure on the NHS, whether it's older people coming into A&E, or whether it's people who ought to be discharged but are occupying beds because the social care isn't available. But we also need to look at how we bear down on costs. PFI is going to cost the NHS upwards of £2 billion for at least the next decade, and there are ways of trying to manage down the PFI payments. I've been talking to CEOs of big London teaching hospitals who want to buy out their PFI because with interest rates so low, it's cheaper to do that than pay the PFI
But are you
money.
prepared to say the NHS can't realistically do this or that or whatever? We've got to be limited. I mean, you know, because at the moment, I read your plan or the plan in your article, and it was all about what you can achieve, not what we're going to have to be realistic about.
You know, the people like you who say we have to be realistic are trying to say that we should lean more heavily on private care. But we know...
I'm saying you're going to have to be realistic about what the NHS can and can't do. I'm saying, are you prepared to say there are things the NHS can't do?
No, I'm prepared to be realistic about the costs, and we have to be realistic about how we meet those costs. And there are ways of, I think, bearing down on costs through looking at things like PFI, the amount of agency staff, what we spend on drugs. But actually, at the end of the day, we need an NHS which is free at the point of use and gives everybody, irrespective of where they live, a decent standard of care.
Is this the kind of honest debate you mean when you're talking about an honest debate with the public?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, these are real issues. PFI does cost money, although it's slightly difficult to see what you can do about it now. Agency staffing, as Diane mentioned, is a real issue, as are drugs prices. But at least in the longer term, perhaps beyond this Parliament, even if the NHS does meet these very ambitious savings target, then there will have to be a conversation about, does the NHS need more money, and considerably more money? And if it does, is that going to come from taxation, borrowing, cuts to other public services? because those are really the only options on the table.
Isn't it just an admission of defeat, though, if you start saying we can't do this, that and the other? I mean, this debate has gone on for as long as the NHS has been around, you know, rationing, what we can't do. Why do we need to start saying now that there are things we can't do when we've managed to get away with it for so long?
The NHS and other health systems have never been able to do everything that could be possible. You could spend an almost infinite amount of money getting tiny increments of extra healthcare benefit out, and indeed, arguably, in some cases, we go too far at the moment. A line has to be drawn somewhere. What we're saying is just that the public need to be involved in that debate, and then there needs to be a real national conversation thinking about how much we want to put in and what we want to get out.
I agree there needs to be a national conversation. What you have to remember is people are living older with multiple conditions. When the NHS was set up, people died at 60. Now they're living to their 80s with blood pressure, diabetes and so on. So there needs to be an honest conversation.
So demands are greater?
Of course, and expectations are greater, so we need an honest conversation. But at the end of the day, the Labour Party is saying it has to remain free at the point of use, although we have to examine how we fund it.
And there's nothing you would rule out? There's no treatment you would start saying, we can't afford that anymore?
Would you want to go to hospital and have someone say to you, you know, Christian, we can't do anything to your leg because we can't afford it today? You wouldn't want that, and I'm not going to have that happen to my constituents.
Do you think that needs to happen, Mark Down?
Look, that's one of a range of very difficult options that people might need to look at. And, you know, there will be some cases where the clinical advantage of an operation, for example, on somebody who's already very unwell from many other illnesses, might be relatively marginal. And in those cases, you could have a conversation like that. But, I mean, I certainly think that the British public are firmly supportive of an NHS that continues to provide the bulk of healthcare in a comprehensive way. I don't see that changing.
And you think that's exactly what the government want to change?
We know.
I mean, why do you think Jeremy Hunt kept his job?
You need to ask Theresa May. I mean, because Jeremy Hunt lied to Parliament and lied to the public about 7-day-a-week NHS when he knew his own officials were saying he didn't have the money, he didn't have the staff to have those improvements in a 7-day-a-week NHS. I mean, there's always been elements in the Tory party, and you will know better than I, who've wanted to push towards a US-type insurance-based system, always.
We must leave it there. Diane Abbott, Mark Diane, thank you very much indeed.
Still to come tonight, a meeting of minds. UKIP's Nigel Farage tells Trump and Trump supporters that they can beat Washington if they work for it. And there are now more people born in Poland living in Britain than from any other foreign country. We go to the town where 1 in 3 residents are migrants.
We're nothing against them. I mean, they're all very hard-working, but we've got too many. This is what the problem is. They've taken over our small town.
The 5 men who died in the sea off Camber Sands in East Sussex were a group of friends from London. They'd gone down to the beach to enjoy themselves on the hottest day of the year so far. Sussex police say the men were all aged in their late teens or early 20s. Another man drowned in the same area last month, triggering an online petition for lifeguards to be stationed on the beach. Porrick O'Brien is there now. Porrick.
Matt, welcome to another sultry evening in the beautiful Camber Sands. The sun is hot, the sea is still. But yesterday, this became the incongruous backdrop for the most heartbreaking loss of young life.
Like 25,000 other people, 5 young men packed their things and headed to the beach at Camber Sands yesterday. The sea was calm, the sun was out, just like today. Then, against the backdrop of sandcastles and windbreakers, 5 young lives snuffed out in the sea.
It was exactly this time of the day yesterday when this terrible tragedy started to unfold. And as the day has gone on, we're starting to learn more about the victims.
They were young Londoners of Sri Lankan background. Friends have identified the victims, Ken Nathan and his brother, Kobe. Kurasant Shrithavaraja. Nitharsan Ravi also lost his life, whose brother spoke of his loss today. The trauma still raw, and as you do, still using the present tense for the one you love.
A good thing about him, he cares about others. He treats them like others as like their own siblings as well. Just even if you like wants to help them out, like even how far you are, just goes there straight away and he's like, okay, how can I help you? Like that type of person he is, you know. So it's hard to find another guy like him.
The big question, of course, is how did this terrible tragedy happen? One of the theories is that underneath the waves here, the seabed undulates this way. So if you're unaccustomed with the sea, And when tide is out, you make your way onto one of those sea banks. As the tide comes round you, you're caught unawares if you don't understand how the tidal range works.
Camber Sands is London's beach of choice. It attracts enormous crowds. It has beach patrols, but a bone of contention locally, no dedicated lifeguard service.
On what planet is it justifiable that there will be 25,000 people on a beach and no lifeguard?
I think that is obviously a valid question, but
Well, what's the answer to it?
well, the answer to it is that it's a question I've asked, obviously, but Rother has worked with other agencies, including the RNLI, who advise us on the necessity for lifeguards. And the RNLI has time and time again deemed this beach to have no necessity for lifeguards. It's deemed to be a safe beach,
But
a
with the
safe
greatest respect to the RNLI, aren't they just wrong?
Well, obviously, this is something we need to look at going forward.
This time next year, do you think there'll be a lifeguard on this beach?
Probably.
This is the Home Secretary Amber Rudd's constituency of East Sussex. An online petition had urged her to put lifeguards on patrol after a young tourist drowned here 4 weeks ago. In a statement today, she paid tribute to the emergency services and spoke to the ongoing investigation into how this happened.
In fairness to the District Council here and the RNLI, there's also an issue around educating the public around how to use beaches. The councillor you heard in our report went on to talk to me about, and I quote, a cultural black spot where families and communities come down to this beach from London and don't really understand how the sea works or how the tidal system works here. Some of them, she said, unable to swim, taking unnecessary risks. So education, as well as course of the lifeguard issue, one of the key issues that needs to be examined here.
Warwick O'Brien on Camber Sands Beach, thanks very much indeed. Christian.
Now, 6 migrants who were trying to reach the Kent coast in a small dinghy have been rescued from a sandbank in the English Channel. The Maritime and Coast Guard Agency sent a search and rescue helicopter and a boat to retrieve the migrants off the coast of Dover this morning. The National Crime Agency revealed earlier this year that migrants are paying smuggling gangs over £10,000 to reach the UK. There's been a significant fall in grades across the board in GCSE results published today. The proportion of students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland achieving A star to C grades has fallen by more than 2 percentage points to 66.9%. The main fall occurred in England, where a change in the system meant students were required to resit English and maths exams if they had failed to achieve a C grade last year. Our Home Affairs correspondent Darshna Soni has been to 2 very different schools in Nottingham to see how they fared.
It was bad enough having to collect his results.
James Wakefield.
Without having Channel 4 News asking him to wear a camera while he did it.
Thank you.
A tentative opening of the envelope. His future printed on a piece of pink paper.
Fantastic.
Got 2 A's, which is, I didn't think I was going to get any A's. I just thought B's would do. So I got some A's, which was good, I thought.
So better than you expected?
Yeah.
It was then time to show his results to his mum.
Oh, well done. That's amazing. It's amazing. Are you pleased with that?
Yeah, I'm pleased with that.
What happened to the English language then?
Clearly she's not very good at it.
Almost 5 million GCSE results were published today. Overall, the results are down to their lowest level since 2008. This is partly because of changes introduced by the government, which has meant pupils who failed to pass English and maths last year have had to retake them this year.
The number of pupils having to resit maths and English is up by a quarter. The government says these subjects are crucial for social mobility, but is the policy fair?
I'm really disappointed.
Oh, what did you get?
English, E's, Maths D, and Science, F and E's.
What were you hoping to get?
At least C's, really.
Ria Scotton had been hoping to study beauty therapy at college, but will now have to spend a year doing the resits. Critics say we shouldn't expect every pupil to get a grade C.
What we know is that youngsters can improve a little bit on their performance at 16, whereas youngsters who've got E's and F's will find it extremely difficult to upgrade to a C. So we say they should look at alternative qualifications.
We want to improve the job prospects, the earning capacity of young people,
and achieving a good pass in those two subjects is absolutely vital.
There have been huge changes in education in recent times, which have impacted on today's results. And there are more changes to come. Next year, GCSEs will be graded by numbers rather than letters.
Well, it has been a big challenge for teachers because the specifications of all the courses they've been teaching have all changed as well. The government have definitely raised the bar in terms of the standards that's expected of young people nowadays. And so, yes, it has been challenging for the teachers to effectively teach new courses.
You can't cry without me. I'm going to cry without you.
The gender gap has widened further this year, with just over 70% of girls getting C's or above, compared to 62% of boys. With his grades, Harry Walker could have gone on to do A-levels, but he's decided to go for a vocational BTEC in drama instead.
Ultimately, it's about kind of doing what it is you want to do, you know, like just follow your dreams and don't be sort of dictated by anyone else.
And that perhaps is the best advice of all for anyone who collected their results today. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News, Nottingham.
Now, the figures were down slightly, but more than 300,000 more people came to live in the UK than went abroad in the year to March. That's more than 3 times the target that Theresa May has again committed the government to reach. The numbers are split equally between migrants from in the EU and from outside. But for the first time, Poland has overtaken India as the most common non-UK country of birth. Fatima Manji has spent much of the day in Wisbech, where a third of the population are migrants.
With its elegant architecture, Wisbech has formed the backdrop of many a Georgian period drama. But unwittingly, it's also become a scene of immigration debate. Here, the migrants are largely low-skilled agricultural workers. And as a result, finding someone who's upset by how immigration's changed the town doesn't take long.
It'd be nice to walk down the street and hear English talking instead of
different languages.
Correct.
I like England. It's not what my father and my grandfathers fought for. To have it fought up with foreigners. Half of these foreigners were on the side of Hitler.
We're nothing against them. I mean, they're all very hard working. But we've got too many. This is what the problem is. They've taken over our small town.
Britain is undoubtedly changing. Today's migration figures show for the first time Poland is the most common country of birth for non-UK born residents. Net migration remains at a record level, more than 300,000. That's 3 times the government's target. But some here in Wisbech think the problems being attributed to immigration locally are actually a debate about something else.
People in their ordinary lives don't understand macroeconomic benefits. What they understand is schools, doctors, access to housing, and all of those have been impacted by migration. But it's not the fault of the people that have come to better their lives. It's a failure of the agencies, of government, local government, and the big employers who attracted the migrants over here in the first place.
Dean Reeves volunteers at the Rosmini Centre, a community cafe where migrants can get advice and support. Mika originally came to the area 10 years ago from Latvia to work in a food factory. He's now employed by the centre and says there's uncertainty about the future, but for now he's working hard to encourage integration.
Some people, yes, I think is worried. They come, they try to doing residency, to stay in England. I think if this person to working hard here, he pay taxes, he prove really he is working here. Yeah, I don't think is English government tries to send these people out.
Today's figures show a slowdown in the numbers of people coming here from Eastern Europe. But migration from Bulgaria and Romania is at a record level. The government says it reflects the success of the British economy. Many newer migrants here will be working at farms and in the food industry. And those employers are concerned at the drive to cut migration.
It would be impossible for us to harvest our lettuce and our salads. It would be absolutely impossible. There aren't enough British people who are interested in the seasonal farming jobs. So when we're looking for 2,500 people every year, then we do need to go outside of the UK to fill some of those vacancies.
Just 30 miles away from Wisbech, Gee's is one of the largest salad producers in the UK. Seasonal workers are largely from Romania and Bulgaria and housed in hostels on site. the government's chief advisor on immigration control has suggested introducing a work permit for low-skilled EU migrants. Gs say they'd welcome it, but numbers are needed. And this is the difficulty for the government: how to balance the pressure to cut migration with the demands of employers who need it to survive.
Fatima Manji in Wisbech. Question.
Thanks, Matt. They are perhaps natural transatlantic soulmates. Donald Trump even tweeted recently that he could become known as Mr. Brexit. But last night he played host to a man with a better claim to the title, Nigel Farage. The former UKIP leader told a rally of Trump supporters that they too could beat the establishment if they went out and worked for it. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris joins us now. Does Donald Trump really need Nigel Farage?
Well, I think, Krish, we're getting to the point where all support is welcome. I know it's not very Brexit to talk about polls, but the New York Times today said that Hillary Clinton has an 88% chance of winning this election. A lot can change, of course, between now and November, but the Trump campaign has had a really awful month. Nigel Farage is by no means a household name in America. I'm not sure this will make a massive difference to a swing voter in Ohio, but it may well entice a Republican donor to believe that victory might be possible for Donald Trump and to dig deep. And I think that was what was meant to be on display in Mississippi last night. Nigel Farage's winning ways, the success of the Leave campaign. It was meant to inspire, I think. And this is the way that Nigel Farage sold his message last night.
Folks, the message is clear. The parallels are there. There are millions of ordinary Americans who've been let down, who've had a bad time, who feel the political class in Washington are detached from them. They feel people aren't standing up for them, and they've actually, in many cases, given up on the whole electoral process. And I think that you have a fantastic opportunity here.
Now, the reason why Donald Trump held this campaign, we think, in Jackson, Mississippi last night was to try and continue this outreach to African-American voters. Again, talking about polls, currently he's polling less than 1% nationally with African-American voters. For that reason, he's speaking in a majority, he was speaking in a majority African-American town. But of course, he did take up Nigel Farage's themes. He talked about the common issues, the choices facing the American people, and as well reminded everyone, of course, that polls aren't always right.
The issues we face here in America are similar to the issues faced in Britain during their referendum on membership in the European Union. This is the movement known as Brexit. On June 23rd, the people of Britain voted to declare their independence, which is what we're looking to do also, folks.
So is he flip-flopping on immigration?
Well, yeah, it's kind of ironic that Nigel Farage was on stage with Donald Trump at a time, or even getting on the Trump train at a time when Donald Trump seemed to be softening his position on immigration. No longer is the talk of mass deportations. Instead, the issue seems to be, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, that as long as you don't have a criminal record, you can and you pay your back taxes, you might be able to stay. It's all very unclear. Really, he needs to reach out to people who found his extreme views unpalatable, so he's softening his stance, but he's not making anything particularly clear. I think it's a sliding scale currently, his immigration policy, and we'll have to see what is kind of cemented in the next few weeks.
Thanks, Kylie.
Security arrangements for the Labour Party conference are in chaos after the security firm G4S turned down a last-minute request from Labour to provide security in Liverpool next month. The request was made even though Labour's National Executive Committee has imposed a boycott on G4S because of the company's links to Israel. But the party is struggling to find another company to do the work. G4S say that with only a month to go until the conference, it is too late for them to step in.
The US Secretary of State has called for talks to restart with a new proposal for a unity government in Yemen after nearly 18 months of war. After meeting Saudi and other Gulf states who are bombing rebel-held parts of the country in support of the Yemeni government, John Kerry said the conflict had gone on too long. But a similar plan was rejected recently by the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and it isn't clear how different this idea is.
The ban on Muslim swimwear known as burkinis from some beaches in France triggered a protest in London today after dumping sand on the road outside the French embassy. Demonstrators threw a Wear What You Want beach party in the hope of persuading French authorities to overturn the ban and to show solidarity with Muslim women in France.
The Colombian government has reached a peace deal with Marxist FARC rebels to end a 5-decade war. Under the historic agreement, the rebels will lay down their arms and reintegrate into civilian life. More than 220,000 people have been killed in the conflict, tens of thousands disappeared, and millions fled their homes because of the violence. A national referendum will take place in October to decide whether to approve the deal.
Russia has agreed to a 48-hour humanitarian pause in the divided Syrian city of Aleppo to allow in aid deliveries. But UN officials say they're still waiting for security guarantees from others before the measure can take effect. Despite efforts to establish a truce, heavy fighting has continued. UN officials say that up to 275,000 people in eastern Aleppo have been almost entirely cut off from vital supplies, including food, water and medicine. An aid convoy is standing by to go into the beleaguered city as soon as all the parties have agreed to that ceasefire. The UN Special Advisor in Aleppo said, along with Madaya and Fur and Kafraya, had been without aid for nearly 4 months.
And we're sorry to say that the 4 towns have now been 116 days without any convoy with food and other supplies. The one glimmer of hope was that at long last there was an evacuation in the recent week of 40 children and others of great medical needs in Madaya, Fua and Kefraya.
Now, in Afghanistan, 13 people have been killed in an attack on the American University in Kabul. 2 unidentified gunmen entered the complex after a suicide bomb had been triggered. 5 security personnel, 7 students and a professor died in the attack. It's the second such attack on the university this month, as our international editor Lindsay Hilsum reports.
Police and special forces rushed to the American University in the south of Kabul. 700 students and teachers were inside at evening classes. A suicide bomber had exploded a vehicle at the gates, allowing 2 gunmen to enter and wreak terror.
I received a text message from my sister and she told me that explosion happened here. She was just worrying and crying and she was telling me that please pray for me because maybe this is my last time that I talk to you.
Ambulances rushed to the scene and rescued those who'd managed to escape.
We didn't feel good and safe, so therefore we jumped from the 2nd floor and escaped to the gateway. Yeah.
This morning, security forces were still at the campus. The operation to rescue those inside and kill the 2 gunmen took 10 hours. Attacks are so frequent in Kabul now, the ritual of being an eyewitness is almost routine.
The bomb blasted at first, there a sudden light came and then a very scary sound of the bomb, and then we run into the hall, and then from there the security guards told us to go back to our classes, and we got trapped in the classes and we locked the doors and we were under 3 chairs, hiding under three chairs.
Afghans can get a Western-style education at the American University. It's prestigious, popular, and the only place in the country where men and women study together. 2 foreign teachers were kidnapped earlier this month. It represents everything the Taliban and other jihadis hate. Amongst those mourned on social media today was law professor Naqib Ahmad Pulwak, who had chosen to return to Afghanistan after a Fulbright scholarship to Stanford. The university is a place not just of learning, but of hope for many young Afghans. Their desire for change has been dealt another blow.
Lindsay Hilsum. A reminder of our main news tonight, the number of people killed in the Italian earthquake has risen to at least 250. A series of severe aftershocks and the instability of the remaining buildings have hampered search and recovery attempts. A little earlier, I spoke to the chef and restaurateur Antonio Carlucci, who knows the area very well where the quake occurred, and I asked him, as an Italian, how the disaster made him feel.
As an Italian, I see it, the earthquake, it's a scenario that goes all over Italy, in the Apennine and so on. Now, you expect that some tremor they're there, but you don't expect this anymore. So that's why, the prevention is better than they say it costs a lot of money.
But they might actually not rebuild any of these towns.
It's a lot of history, a lot of this. You can't look after all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But to some degree, you can induce the building authority to do something about prevention. And the prevention is possible, with money, obviously, but it's possible. But it's better to spend money in prevention than only money now
So your Italy is blessed by culture, but you're cursed by geology.
The geology is not friendly of Italy. But I'm glad that at least the Italian, you see how they are adamant really to help each other. And that's very, very good. It's sort of incredible helping from each side. For example, they had to stop to say people come to the area, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to work and to help. But it's really tragic.
And the town of Amatrice, which is famous for the
pasta,
Amatriciana sauce, we won't discuss the recipe now, but I mean, it's famous for that.
Yeah.
They were going to hold a spaghetti festival this weekend.
Yeah, they were doing, yes. And that's a pity because all the Roman population was there. When you go and have fresh air, 1,500 meters, it's just wonderful. And that's why not only local people died, but also quite a lot of foreign as well.
But when you're watching the television, when you're watching these pictures from here, as an Italian, as someone who knows that area very well, what goes
frankly, I would like to go there and help move the stones, but it cries, and any earthquake that pulls down houses anywhere over the world, it's bad. But this one, it's really near the bone.
Antonio Carlucci, thank you very much.
When we come back, he made his name in the TV series Breaking Bad. Like the character he played, RJ Mitte has cerebral palsy. I'll be talking to him about his next role, presenting Channel 4's coverage of the Paralympics. Now, in 12 days' time, Channel 4 will take up the Paralympic baton, beaming back all of the action from Rio. The presenting team includes the American actor RJ Mitte, whose character in the cult series Breaking Bad had cerebral palsy, just like the actor himself. I'll be speaking to him in a moment, but first, a little background.
Does that put him to sleep?
This one just relaxes him a little.
Walter White Jr. in Breaking Bad, the show that RJ Mitte says gave him more work than he could possibly imagine. TV drama, independent film, modelling for Vivienne Westwood, and now presenting the Paralympics. From Breaking Bad to breaking barriers, just like his character in the TV series, Roy Jr., or RJ, has cerebral palsy, though he learned to walk on crutches and slur his speech for the part.
For real?
Yep, they're coming to interview you with a photo and everything.
Awesome.
RJ says the pain and the joy that cerebral palsy brings have helped him create his characters. A disability is knowledge, he says. A disability is power. And presenting the Paralympics, he hopes to direct that power to a global audience. But Rio faces criticism before the Games have begun, and not just for the budget cuts. Vogue Brazil is being attacked for digitally altering two famous actors to make them look like Paralympians. Why, in 2016, couldn't they find stars like RJ Mitte in Brazil? And RJ Mitte is with me now. And incidentally, in a few minutes, we will be carrying on the conversation on the Channel 4 News Facebook page. So if you'd like to ask him a question, then go on there and start writing. But let's begin with this whole question of portrayal. Because, I mean, Brazilian Vogue's got into a little bit of trouble. I mean, how far do you think the world still has to go on getting it right?
I don't think there is getting it right, and I think it just shows you more and more people want to be disabled. I think that just shows you that this is the new normal. This is what people are wanting. People want realism. They want to see more of people that are different on television and film. And there was a Scope study that showed that 77% of people with disabilities, when they saw the Paralympics or people like them on TV, that it increased morale. And the thing is people want to see themselves on television. And when you have a disability, that number is so small, and it needs to grow because it has such a big impact.
I mean, what do you love about the Paralympics?
Well, first of all, I'm a guy that loves sports. I love not just the sports themselves, but the game of the sport, the challenge, the competition. And you know, these Olympic in the past couple of weeks, these Olympic Games were amazing, and I just can't wait to see these warriors combat again. Just they have so much more drive and more anguish in them to win. They want to win. They need to win, and it just shows you when you see these people compete how badly they want it.
I think in London 2012, a lot of us, like to think that it really did change attitudes to some degree. It may not have changed people's lives, disabled people's lives, but it certainly changed attitudes towards disabled people. And I wonder whether Rio can achieve a similar sort of leap.
I think Channel 4 is definitely going to be pioneering that leap to changing the atmosphere and changing the vibe of how people view disability, especially with these Paralympic Games. And it really is important that we do show that honestly and wholeheartedly. I just see it's evolving so rapidly, but it takes time. This is something that takes effort and time, and you can't rush this. This is not something that we can just run and be like, oh, we're fixing this, we're changing this now. This takes a mindset change.
Because, I want to ask you about your acting career as well, in that Breaking Bad obviously had, a huge effect on your career.
It gave me a career.
It gave you a career. But, the number of people with a disability you see in mainstream drama is still tiny, isn't it?
It is. When it gets down to actually online representation, it's around 2% of people with disabilities on the screen, of speaking roles, which when you think about the grand scheme of the world when it comes down to disability, is not relevant. It doesn't equal. There's no equality with that.
So do you think anything changed after your role on Breaking Bad?
I think a lot has changed. I think Breaking Bad really pioneered a lot of TV shows and a lot of different writers to be more brave with their writing, to put people that you wouldn't normally see on television, to put them on television. And since we're having this discussion now, it's worked because we're having this discussion. We're continuing this discussion, and it's continuing to evolve and grow into something that we can't control.
But are there other actors of the same kind of stature as you who have a disability in working in Hollywood?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few of us. There's a big organization called IMPWD that's an organization inside of SAG-AFTRA, which is our union, that is doing just that, fighting for people with disabilities to get on the screen. And they're all working actors. They're all people that are professionals, that have everything from missing appendages to birth defects to what I have, and it's
And what kind of
growing.
roles? Because, you've played disabled characters, but you also played characters that were never written as disabled parts.
I played a few of those in later date now. Only in the past couple of years I've played more of more normalized roles. But I think we have a long way to go, and I think that's not just the actor's responsibility, but that's casting, that's directors, that's producers. And slowly but surely we are changing their minds. But it is a business, and you have to do that slowly.
Well, RJ, stay with us, because we are going to carry on with this conversation right now on the Channel 4 News Facebook page, putting your questions to RJ Mitte about acting, sport, disability, whatever you want to talk to him about. I've had my go, it's your go now. So join us there in a minute. But that's it for Channel 4 News on the telly tonight, old-fashioned TV. Until tomorrow, good evening. So